If you asked any Frostpunk player what is the most iconic moment of Frostpunk, they most likely would say it was the moment that the game started playing boss music for the weather. The Great Storm is referenced in multiple scenarios. It's the final crisis during a new home, you deal with its aftermath in On the Edge, you must prepare for it during the Arks, and it's the persistent threat during Endless Mode. But this couldn't just be some normal storm, or could it? I first started playing Frostpunk in 2019. In that year, Chicago faced wind chills below -40, and other places in the Midwest experienced chills as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit, and many other places throughout the Northern Hemisphere have also experienced significant cold snaps in the years following. Ironically attributed to global warming, but more on that later. And then the news started spouting off terms like the polar vortex and bomb cyclones. But do those even have anything to do with Frostpunk Storm? So before we get started theorizing about the storm, we need to establish the facts of what we know about it exactly. First off, we know that it comes from the south, and if you spend enough time in loading screens, we also learn that the rapid global cooling has destabilized the planet's air currents. This is further confirmed if you explore Nansen's Stormwatch after rescuing the trapped refugees. Here Nansen notes that the jet stream has destabilized, and is ablating upon descent, which is likely where the extreme cold that you experience comes from, and the wind caused by it is gale force 10. Now this is actually a real measurement. Well, kind of. The Beaufort scale ranks a gale between 7 and 10 on the scale, with corresponding to winds between 28 and 55 knots, which I kind of find a little bit odd, because this is less than a hurricane force wind. This is especially odd considering the devastation we discover in its aftermath during On the Edge, which has utterly destroyed various landmarks like Nansen's Stormwatch, the Winter Home Shelter, and the coal mine. Of course, there's always the possibility that the game has an unreliable narrator, and the predictions in the lore entries are simply inaccurate. So it's very likely that the storm was far stronger than originally predicted. You have to remember that the only reason weather predictions are as accurate as they are in the modern day is due to an extensive network of satellites and sophisticated sensors all around the world, and storm predictions are still about as certain as throwing a bowl of spaghetti on a map. Scientists in the 1880s would only have a fraction of the data you have available to you on your smartphone. Now, references to the jet stream and the fact that the storm comes from the south are perhaps the most promising when it comes to a realistic theory about the storm. Various other commenters have also theorized that the frost is in part caused by the trade winds. At the very least, this is a lot more realistic than the day after tomorrow's freeze-ray hurricane that forms over land. Now, winds exist due to differences of pressure caused by the uneven heating of the atmosphere, because, well, you know, the Earth is a ball. Ergo, the equator gets more direct heat from the sun than the poles, which means that the Earth's major air currents, or trade winds, originate from the equator and move toward the poles. However, since the Earth rotates, this has also caused the Earth's atmosphere to separate into 3 distinct circulation cells in both hemispheres. Where 2 circulation cells converge is a current known as a jet stream. You may have heard of it. Normally, these air currents circle the globe at an altitude similar to that of an airliner, so a flight headed west will take longer than the same flight headed east. But again, what does this have to do with Frostpunk? Well, you might have heard the term polar vortex thrown around in the news whenever we have major cold snaps. This is an instability of the jet stream caused by warming in the Arctic and warmer high-pressure air masses from the mid-latitudes traveling north, which in turn makes the jet stream more wavy. This means that for a few days or so, the mid-latitudes then encounter much colder air than normal from the polar circulation cells, ironically caused by global warming. But again, this shouldn't affect what we experience in Frostpunk, as they are experiencing a volcanic winter, not global warming, and we should be north of the jet stream, as the game takes place in the boreal north, so it should already be in the polar air mass, and it doesn't explain the extreme cold that you experience during the storm either. This leads us to bombogenesis, or what is often referred to as a bomb cyclone in the news. Likewise, this is also used in relation to winter cold snaps, but keep in mind that this is a different thing than the polar vortex, but does occur in relation to the polar vortex. So, what the heck is it then? A bomb cyclone, or an extratropical cyclone, occurs when there is a rapid decrease in pressure over a 24-hour period. This occurs when a warm and cold air mass collide, and will generally result in heavy precipitation, or in this case snow, in addition to strong winds. Cold air is more dense than warmer air, therefore it starts to sink, and is carried by high winds caused by the low pressure zone. Therefore you experience colder temperatures and significant winds on the ground during a bomb cyclone. Extreme cold temperatures of -60 to -90 degrees Celsius aren't unheard of in the upper atmosphere, and that isn't even considering the other cooling factors in Frostpunk, like reduced solar insolation due to atmospheric aerosols, and the sun dimming. Stratospheric aerosol injections are often referred to as an anti-greenhouse effect, as it works to reflect sunlight, leading to cooling, while on the other hand, greenhouse gases absorb it, leading to warming. But this skirts the fact that stratospheric aerosols would also prevent light from reaching the greenhouse gases of the troposphere in the first place. The high amount of stratospheric aerosols from the many volcanic eruptions in Frostpunk could cause heating in the upper atmosphere and cooling in the troposphere as sunlight is reflected away from the surface. This is what happens in a standard volcanic winter, but Frostpunk takes this to the nth degree. So we can say that perhaps the stratosphere faces extreme warming, which causes the air to expand, thus increasing its pressure at a higher altitude, in turn pushing down upon the colder air below it, thus allowing the jet stream to dip closer to the surface. This then blasts the surface with supercooled air from high up in the atmosphere as the bands of the jet stream pass through. This should also explain how areas close to the equator had experienced Arctic storms in Frostpunk. As the storms are atmospheric instabilities, they shouldn't be a permanent feature of the world as the climate eventually stabilizes, which appears to be supported by the promo newspaper release for Frostpunk 2. The newspaper article commemorates 30 years since the Great Storm, which talks about it as if nothing quite like it has happened in the decades since. And the New London scientists also predicted that the climate would stabilize after the storm, which for the most part appears to be the case, albeit a lot colder than normal. However, none of what I've talked about so far explains how the world could still be frozen 30 years later, like we see in Frostpunk 2. Aerosols will eventually settle out, and the atmosphere can stabilize, so clearly there's another outside force that's still keeping the planet on ice. But that will have to wait until the next video in this series.